Boss battles, the moments that push players to their limits, the encounters that define stories, test our skills, and live rent free in our memories for decades. From pixelated blobs that took 3 hits to die to cinematic titans that shake the heavens, the boss battle has evolved from a simple design necessity into a storytelling art form. But how did this happen? How did we go from a single oversized enemy at the end of a stage to the mind bending, emotionally charged boss fights of today? Let's trace that journey. This is the evolution of boss battles in video games.
To understand boss battles, we have to rewind to the late 1970s, a time when video games were young, screens were green, and memory space was measured in kilobytes. In the earliest arcade hits like Space Invaders and Galaxian, there were no bosses in the modern sense, just waves of identical enemies growing faster and more difficult. But players and designers craved culmination, something that marked progress, something that said, "You've reached the end, prove yourself." That idea slowly evolved into what we now call the boss fight. When Donkey Kong arrived, it gave players an antagonist with a name, personality, and purpose. Jumpman's mission to rescue Pauline wasn't just about reaching the top, it was about confronting Donkey Kong himself. That confrontation gave players something emotional to latch onto, and just like that, the boss became the star. As consoles grew, so did ambition. Super Mario Bros. Introduced Bowser, arguably gaming's first true iconic boss. Every world ended with the same message: reach the bridge, dodge the fire, and drop Bowser into the lava. It was simple but powerful. Players expected that climactic moment. Meanwhile, games like Metroid began experimenting with bosses that were bigger, scarier, and mechanically distinct. Enemies like Kraid and Ridley weren't just obstacles, they were tests of everything you'd learned. These fights introduced patterns, stages, and the idea of weak points, elements that would define the decades to come. Boss battles were no longer just about winning, they were about learning. By the late 80s, developers had found the secret sauce. Bosses were the payoff, the reason players kept feeding quarters or saving passwords. The Mega Man series revolutionized the formula. Each boss wasn't just a wall to overcome, it was a lesson. Defeat one and you'd gain their ability, changing how you fought the next. That rock paper scissors design loop was brilliant. It rewarded experimentation and strategy instead of brute force. At the same time, Castlevania introduced cinematic presentation. Facing Dracula at the end of the game wasn't just a battle, it was an event. The music swelled, the background darkened, and for a few minutes, you were in a gothic opera of chaos. Meanwhile, the arcade boom brought fast-paced, pattern-based showdowns, Contra, Gradius, R-Type, where reflexes and memorization ruled. And then came the mascot wars. Sonic the Hedgehog turned boss battles into rhythm and speed challenges. Every stage ended with Dr. Robotnik in a new contraption, a reward for mastering Sonic's momentum. But the biggest leap came from RPGs. Final Fantasy IV and Chrono Trigger gave bosses personalities, backstories, and stakes. You weren't just fighting monsters, you were confronting ideologies. By the time Final Fantasy VII introduced Sephiroth, boss battles had become emotional experiences. That final duel wasn't just the end of a game, it was the resolution of a journey. And then, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time changed everything again. Every boss was part puzzle, part spectacle, part storytelling. You didn't just swing your sword, you used your brain. Phantom Ganon emerging from paintings or Bongo Bongo drumming the battlefield, these fights felt alive. Boss battles had become cinematic before games were cinematic. By the 2000s, boss design entered a new era, the cinematic revolution. Hardware was stronger, storytelling was deeper, and developers began asking, how can we make a boss fight feel epic? Metal Gear Solid had already broken barriers, but its sequels perfected the craft. Bosses like Psycho Mantis read your memory card, moved your controller, and forced you to swap controller ports, turning the player into part of the fight. And that was the point. Boss battles were no longer in the game, they were with the game. Then came Devil May Cry and God of War, where bosses were massive, cinematic, and full of attitude. Every clash was a spectacle of choreography and emotion. Kratos vs. Ars felt like the digital equivalent of watching Greek mythology unfold before your eyes. But one title took a completely different approach, Shadow of the Colossus. No minions, no dungeons, just 16 colossal beings, each a puzzle of movement, physics, and heartbreak. Every victory felt hollow, every fight a tragedy. It defined what a boss battle could mean emotionally. And then Resident Evil 4 brought tension and terror into the mix. Fights like the Lake Monster or Krauser's knife duel turned boss encounters into interactive thrillers. Even Metroid Prime evolved the classic formula. Bosses became environmental, multi-layered encounters that immersed you in atmosphere. By the end of the decade, players expected boss fights to be set pieces, not just tests of skill. They were narrative punctuation marks, exclamation points at the end of every story arc. Then came the 2010s, and with them, a new philosophy. Games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne resurrected something players didn't know they missed: challenge. No scripted cutscenes, no QTEs, just raw combat, precision, and the satisfaction of earning victory. Bosses like Ornstein and Smo, Sister Friede, or Lady Maria weren't cinematic in a traditional sense, they were ballet-like duels. The player wasn't just watching an epic fight, they were the fight. But not every innovation was about difficulty. Undertale flipped the script, asking if fighting was even necessary. Bosses talked to you, questioned you, remembered your choices. Some were heartbreakingly peaceful. Others were terrifying in their self-awareness. Meanwhile, Cuphead took the 1930s animation style and built an entire game around boss encounters. No filler levels, no fluff, just pure pattern-based mastery. Every boss was a living cartoon, blending nostalgia with modern chaos. And in Nier Automata, bosses became vessels for philosophy, reflecting questions about identity, morality, and consciousness. Suddenly the line between player and narrative blurred completely. Boss battles had evolved beyond mechanics. They were now about meaning. Elden Ring represents the pinnacle of From Software's philosophy: open-world freedom wrapped around unforgettable bosses like Malenia, Starscourge Radahn, and the Elden Beast. Each fight tells its story through combat, rhythm, music, and motion. No words needed. Meanwhile, Resident Evil 4 Remake reimagined classic encounters with modern cinematic polish, balancing nostalgia and innovation perfectly. Final Fantasy XVI went full spectacle, entire boss fights designed like playable anime episodes, filled with scale, emotion, and orchestral firepower. And indie games continue to innovate. Hades, Hollow Knight, Dead Cells, Cuphead, and Lies of P, proving that tight design and emotional storytelling can coexist in pure gameplay form. Modern boss battles blend emotion, challenge, cinema, and player agency like never before. They're not just the end of a level, they're statements. They tell you what the game believes in. They make you feel something when it's over. From 8-bit sprites to sprawling mythological epics, the boss battle has always been more than a test. It's the soul of gaming. It's where all your learning, failure, and frustration come together in one unforgettable moment. It's that rush of adrenaline when the health bar drops to 0, and that quiet satisfaction when the victory music plays. Bosses teach us patience, they reward mastery. They make our victories mean something. As games continue to evolve, one truth remains: no matter the graphics, genre, or decade, a great boss battle reminds us why we fell in love with video games in the first place.
So, what's your favorite boss battle of all time? Drop it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. It really helps more gamers discover videos like these. I'm James, and this was the evolution of boss battles in video games. Thanks for watching, and good luck on your next fight.